4. Ah, 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 ah. Hi everyone. Hi everyone. My name is Edoardo Binda Zane. I'm a leadership and communication trainer and consultant, and of course, and obviously the host of this webinar, Intro to Emotional Intelligence for Leaders. Now, despite what everything looks like, I do not start from coaching and training. I actually come from consulting. That was consulting. And I was lucky enough back in the days to access consulting at a very high level. I was working side by side with the European Commission, and that entering that world at that level allowed me to see both the good sides and the bad sides of it. The good sides were Hi, my name is Edoardo Binda Zane. I'm a leadership and communication trainer and coach, and of course, obviously, the host of this webinar, Intro to Emotional Intelligence for Leaders. Now, brief story about me. I do not start my career as a communication trainer and coach. I actually start from consulting, and I was lucky enough to access that world, work in that world at a very high level from the beginning. I was working side by side with the European Commission. And having that experience allows me to see well, the good sides of it, but also the flaws. Also the flaw. But also the flaws. So hello everyone. This is the first time I'm doing a live streaming on Instagram ever. Today is one of the days I run one of my regular webinars, which is Intro to Emotional Intelligence for Leaders. And I usually run it as a webinar on YouTube, but I figured out it could be just as well worth sharing this webinar on Instagram as well. So most of the time I'll be looking towards this and this camera because I have the slides, I have all the points, and if you're looking to see that webinar stream live right now, you can also head over to my YouTube channel. However, if you're just casually browsing on the phone and want to have something to listen to, be interested in emotional intelligence for leaders, get to know a bit more about what I'm doing, why I'm doing it, and what's the science underpinning my work, well, you can just listen to here. It's just going to be exactly the same thing, but forgive me if I'm not looking at you directly. The camera is exactly here for myself. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask them. I'll be able to address them only towards the end. But that's about it. I think or just come over and watch on YouTube, or just send me a message, to be honest. These days we can engage however we want, whenever we can, and please don't feel shy if you have any questions or something isn't clear. Right, I do have still 1 minute to go. I have my slides set up, and just as a general piece of introduction, this is something I regularly run, which is a condensed free version of my online course, Emotional Intelligence for Leaders. It is not just a sales video, not just a presentation of the course, but I'm actually going into giving content, sharing some points that people can already use. And of course, there is going to be the chance of buying the course afterwards, but if that's not your thing, if that's not what you're going for, whatever I'm discussing about here, whatever points I'm giving you, you can take a look, and if you want to upgrade later on, it's just as easy as a click. Right. It is 11:30 and I'm about to start this webinar. Hello everyone, my name is Edoardo Binda Zane. I'm a leadership and communication trainer and coach working in Berlin and working across Europe right now remotely, and obviously the host of this webinar, Intro to Emotional Intelligence for Leaders. Now, despite the whole presentation, my website and my online presence, training and coaching is not exactly where I come from. I actually started my career in consulting, and I was lucky enough back in the days to access consulting at a very high level. I was working side by side with the European Commission, and working at that level allowed me to witness both the good and the bad sides of that world, something that you only see once you're working in the trenches. And in terms of the good sides, you're lucky enough to work side by side with people that are extremely smart, very competent in their area of work, have a IQ that's calculated in 3, if not 4 digits, and you can learn from them every single step of the way. But on the bad sides, and I'm not just talking about public policy consulting, but in general, I cooperated also with other companies, you see an utter lack of everything on the more human side, communication side, empathetic side. And even back in the days, as someone who was generally interested in this type of work and was already trying to figure out ways to better connect with others professionally, but also personally, I found that just by doing a very limited amount of things, relatively speaking, I could be outperforming in some tasks these people that were actually guiding me. I'm talking about managing others, talking about conflict resolution. I'm talking about negotiation, being on stage, presenting, persuading, everything that has something, let's say, of a softer aspect to it. Right now, we are, of course, in a very specific situation. While there was a need of emotional intelligence in leadership and at work way before COVID hit, right now, COVID, if there is one good thing that came out of it, is the fact that we have touched firsthand what it means to lack psychological safety, to lack empathy, communication, interaction. And before then, of course, emotional intelligence was regarded as important. We talked about it, we drilled it down, we wanted to improve it, but if we're very honest with ourselves, the whole thing was always put in second place. The attention was always focused on performance, on results, on numbers, because there was no tangible connection to anything that had to do with emotional intelligence, say. Now, this has, of course, changed, and we've also been able to measure more the impacts of it. And speaking of measuring, I want to start this webinar by showing you some numbers. Some numbers that are the results of one of the direct effects of having more emotional intelligence in leadership, which is trust. Trust is another huge interest of mine, and establishing trust in leadership turns out to have massive strategic effects. And these numbers come from a 10-year-old study that Paul Jacek and his team performed and looked at the difference between companies where you have a high culture of trust and you have a low culture of trust. And I remember seeing these numbers and being shocked by what they stood for. And I would like to start with this, hoping that it will shock you in exactly the same way. Because establishing emotional intelligence and leading to establishing trust and having trust in a company, well, this is what you can reasonably expect if you go to that process, through that process. You can expect double the energy that people put into work. Double. You can expect 50% more productivity, which means that if 2 people in your team were able to do 2 projects beforehand, now they're able to do 3. You can expect a drop in sick days and a massive drop in the risk of burnout. Now, of course, bringing soft skills, emotional intelligence, anything that's not measurable and tangible to the decision maker, let's call it C-level of upper management right now, is always difficult because there is no tangible sign of the connection it has to performance, to profitability, and so on. But take a look at these numbers and tell me that this does not have immediate effects on profitability, on performance, and everything connected to it. And actually, I've been talking a lot about emotional intelligence, what it means for me, my path here, but I wouldn't like this to be just a one person speaking and blaring information at the camera. So if you're on YouTube, just feel free to write comments, ask questions, communicate with me. I will read the comments as they come in and make sure that I address them as soon as I can or whenever I have a second. Right. Talking about emotional intelligence and developing it, I want to also address, before we get into the whole nitty and gritty, another major problem with emotional intelligence, which is where information is found. Because you have 2 main areas. The first one is, let's say, pop culture. I mean, let's face it, emotional intelligence is nothing new. It's been around for decades. And as such, it's become part of pop culture, and there is a lot of talk around it. But the thing is that most of the content right now is framed into little bite-sized pieces of content that you find in podcasts, in blog posts that are just made for superficial scrolling and superficial digestion. So like 5 ways to give better feedback, or the 5 consequences of having an empathetic leader. These points, which are all valid, but they're all scattered around in different little parts. So we talk about empathy, we talk about mindfulness, we talk about giving feedback, we talk about empathetic leadership. And all of those points are insanely important, but they're just part of a constellation. So if you go down that path, you tend to miss the bigger picture. The alternative is to look into more scientific pieces of work. And here you encounter some other problem, because yes, academics, scientists, researchers have devoted a huge part of their life into studying emotional intelligence and their effects, but because of the type of audience they refer to, the type of content it was written is extremely theoretical. It's extremely proper, but if you are a leader that wants to quickly develop his or her emotional intelligence skills and bring them into practice, reading a book like this or papers like that will of course inform you, but you will find yourself having to take an extra step, as in figuring out what you need to do in practice. Best possible example, the book Emotional Intelligence by Goleman. I think it's a groundbreaking book. I think it's fantastic. I think it started a revolution in the way we approach work, but also personal connections. But if I need to be utterly and brutally honest with myself, it's a very difficult book to read. I found it extremely difficult, and because of this, I found myself going through the book and not really having precise tools or a roadmap to improve my skills and just improve how I approach emotional intelligence. And this is kind of the gap I wanted to bridge with this course, because I wanted to produce something of value to leaders, both experienced but also to new leaders, that was on the one hand referenced scientifically. Everything you're going to hear today is rooted in science. Let me make this clear. But I didn't want this approach to become too theoretical. I wanted to be able to give something in terms of tools, in terms of exercises, in terms of examples that people could take, that you can take, understand, and apply from day one. And I received very good feedback about this work from people that have a degree in psychology and also involved in leading and training. And the feedback, which was unrequested, which I'm also really glad about, was that everything is extremely practical. So this is exactly what I was going for, and this is exactly what I would like to share with you today. Now, of course, this is a 1 hour shortened, punched up together version, intensive of this course. So it's not going to be able to cover everything from A to Z, but it's going to give you the basics and it's going to give you something you can apply. If you want to upgrade to the full version, you can. There is going to be a lot more content in there, a lot more templates, examples, tools for you to manage and to implement immediately by yourself or with your team. And at the end of this webinar, I will also be giving you a 15% discount code for the course. So you might want to be sticking around for that. All of this said and done, let's get into a bit more of the details. As in, we've been going around the topic for a while, but what is emotional intelligence? There are, of course, a bunch of definitions. For me, the clearest one is your ability to take an active role in your emotional life rather than a passive one. Let me repeat that. Emotional intelligence is your ability to take a more active role in your emotional life rather than a passive one. Here's what I mean. I'm thinking always of this example. One of the darkest moments in my life had to do with the end of my first big relationship. And it had to do with the fact that it didn't end well. And despite all my best efforts, I felt the influence of that negativity on me. I had just been dumped. And because of this, I was feeling depressed is a term I'd rather not use. I was always going back to this sense of negativity that that because of my relationship ended, I was feeling. And because of this, because I had always this at the back of my head, I found it difficult to focus, I found it difficult to judge well, I found it difficult to relate to others. And despite my best efforts, I was not able to move away from it. It was almost as if there was a gravitational pull that kept me dragged and anchored to that negative feeling, with all the negative consequences that derive from it. As I said, irritability, lack of energy, not being able to focus, etc., etc., etc. And of course, I'm pretty sure that you also have a version of this in your life. And without dwelling too much into sadness, I think this example clarifies what I mean by having a passive role. Most of the time, we tend to have a passive approach to emotions. We feel something, we accept it, and we accept that our behaviors are influenced by it. So if it's something positive, if something great has happened to you and you're feeling joyful or ecstatic, you'll feel more energetic, you'll feel like you want to interact more, you'll have more patience, you'll be able to focus more, and that's great. However, if the trigger is something negative, well, then the opposite happens. And I don't need to tell you how bad it is to have that as a leadership characteristic. Do you really want your team to observe you as soon as you enter the office and assess whether you're in a good mood or not in order to understand whether they want to talk to you or not? That's not how leadership works. That's part of your job. So developing emotional intelligence becomes key. And let's observe a bit more what it does in practice, because we describe what it is, but what does it do? If we really take an active approach into our emotional life and are able to limit the impact that negative emotions, negative triggers have on our thoughts, our energy levels, our behaviors, well, the immediate consequences is that we free up a bunch of headspace. We remove whatever strain our brain was under because of this negativity that was following us, and we're able to all of a sudden use actively that headspace to do things we need to focus on or redirect our energy. When it comes to ourselves, it means being more focused, being able to create more, to make hypotheses. When it comes to management and leadership, maybe about strategies or options. It makes it easier to learn or understand complex conflicts. And when it comes to your team, it becomes easier to build a better relationship with each member of your team. Why? Simply because all of a sudden you have more headspace, you have more awareness to devote to the other person and to understand what the other person thinks, needs, wants, and whatever it is, you're more able to give that person whatever the need is. And take it at a larger scale. Over time, what does this mean? It means that you'll build trust because you're a good leader and you know, and people perceive that you have a personal relationship to them. You care for them. And that type of care, that type of intensity, paired of course together with good management skills, builds trust, builds resilience, and builds all those amazing numbers that we've seen before. More energy, more productivity, less sick days, less burnout. That is why emotional intelligence is such a key skill for leaders. Now, we talked about what it is, what it does, but we're all here to speak about something else, which is how do you develop emotional intelligence? Emotional intelligence is a skill. A skill comes with guidance and practice. So, what I want to clarify first is the fact that in order to become proficient at emotional intelligence, at interacting with others, giving emotionally relevant feedback, being empathetic, the lot, you need to go through 4 main steps. First one, self-awareness, knowing what you're feeling exactly and why. Second one, influencing your own emotional state. Third one, reading others, reading what they are feeling and what they need. Fourth one, interacting at an emotional level. And whenever we think about emotional intelligence, we think mostly about the fourth point, right? Interacting emotionally with other people because we want to uplift them, we want to influence them, we want to persuade them, etc. And yes, that is true. That's where the most value is for leaders. But before doing that, you need to go through all the rest of the steps. And just like with any skill, the best way to start, the best place to start is knowing where you're starting from. So here is the first free piece of content that I want to give you, which is an emotional intelligence self-assessment. It's for free. You can do it on my website, and it's connected to all those 4 areas. In the test, there are about 50 statements, and all you need to do is take a look at them and say how much you agree or disagree with each one. Your results will tell you what areas you might find yourself weaker or stronger, and then give you an idea where you need to focus on more in order to improve your emotional intelligence skills as efficiently as you can. Watch out first. Watch out though. It doesn't mean that if you're already proficient, if you're, let's say, proficient in the first area, lacking in the second area, in the third and in the fourth, you can just skip ahead. It means only that you need to, you may not need to devote that much energy, but it is important to go through all these 4 steps in order, regardless of your results. The results are only an indication. Why? Because all these 4 steps build on each other. And I'm going to go through all of them one by one below. Okay? Again, if there are any questions, please write them down below. I'll be happy to answer them as soon as I go through them. Let's start with the first block of emotional intelligence. These 4 areas. Self-assessment I've given you. There we are. Self-awareness. Pardon me with the slides. Self-awareness means understanding exactly what you are feeling and why. And if this sounds weird because you already know what you're feeling and why, that makes sense. I get where you're coming from. If you're happy, you're feeling happy. If you're sad, you're feeling sad. What's the big deal? That is true. I see where you're coming from, but let me ask you this. In your life, how often do you dig deeper than this? How often do you distinguish between being optimistic, positive, joyful, ecstatic, serene? Those are all versions of happy. Or feeling disappointed or demotivated or rageful or resentful. Those are all manifestations of sad with different triggers. And it's important to get to know what you're feeling and label your emotions precisely, because unless you know what you're dealing with, you won't be able to influence it correctly. Let me give you an example that I hope will make it somewhat clearer. The difference between guilt and shame. Guilt and shame are 2 different emotions, yet they feel very similar. However, they do mean 2 extremely different things. Feeling guilty means that you don't like something that you have done. Feeling ashamed means you do not like something you have been or who you have been in a specific situation or who you are. Whatever it is, whatever you want to frame it, these 2 emotions feel extremely similar, but the trigger is radically different. One is more superficial, one is much deeper and much more fundamental. So it's important to distinguish what you're feeling, because if you can trace it back to a trigger, then you can do something about it. To use a metaphor, I like cars. I like engines. I grew up watching Top Gear, the old version with Clarkson and the whole gang. And it's just a little passion that I have. But if you ask me to pop a trunk open and fix an engine, I don't know where to put my hands. I have no idea of what it is. I cannot distinguish between a piston and a carburetor, and I have no idea what I'm doing. So same thing, if you want to influence your emotional state, remove the strain that your brain is under by limiting the negative effects of negative emotions, well, you need to know what you're dealing with first. And that's the first point you need to start. Some basic self-reflection can be your best friend right now. Moving on. Influencing your own emotions. Now, influencing your own emotion means again, taking an active role into what you're feeling exactly and why, and limiting how much of a negative pull negative emotions can have. We talked about energy drain, we talked about not being able to judge well, interact well with others, etc., etc., etc. And if you've gone through the first step, well, that's already major progress, because you can identify exactly what you're dealing with and why. Now, once you know, you can intervene about it. And here I would like to share with you 2 steps that are meant to be done in sequence in order to snap out and get out and remove those negative effects that you might be feeling. The first one has to do with, after you recognize that there is something going on and you need to intervene, of course, the first step has to do with snapping out of that negative pull. And the second part has to do with not falling back in. There are 2 different steps. They need to be done in sequence. And one of the exercises or the tools that I want to share with you now has to do with happiness. Now, we all know that feeling happy is nice, right? It's not, I haven't met a single person that doesn't like to be happy. But most of us, I noticed, have a misconception about what makes us happy. We think that, let's say 50-50, we're 50% happy, like it depends on who we are. We are a person generally more or less optimistic. And 50% of our happiness derives from what's happening around us. So our external context, our external conditions. And that makes sense, but that still unfortunately is wrong. Science has come up with an extremely interesting study about this that actually put numbers on what makes us happy. And yes, 50% depends on us, on who we are, what we do, and our outlook on life. About 10% depends on our external conditions, but about 40% is under our direct control, as long as we know how to tap into it. And one of the most powerful ways to tap into that 40% and give it a boost is working on thankfulness. Here is the exercise. Whenever you feel like you need a boost of sorts, whenever you want to, whenever you feel like you need to intervene into your emotional life somehow and change the way you think, change the levels of energy you have, take pen and paper and write down something you are thankful for. Can be as deep as thank you, mother, for giving me an education, to something as superficial as thank you, sun, for shining. It doesn't matter, as long as you're genuinely thankful for it. And that's it. That's all there is. The key here is writing it down, not just thinking about it, because writing something, it's a whole body process. It focuses you onto one thing. It's a lot more intense. Whereas just thinking about it while you're doing something else has little to no effect. But tapping into thankfulness this way, you can frame it as count your blessing if you want, has massive effects on your happiness levels. And I challenge you, do this for 3 days in a row right now, and you will feel how much of an impact this has on your happiness levels. Don't expect anything major, anything groundbreaking, any sort of boost in excitement, but just a general, more positive, optimistic outlook on life. Test it, and I guarantee you'd be surprised. Another way of working with it is using humor correctly, but we don't have time to get into it. As I said in the beginning of this area I'm covering right now, this is a two-step process. The first one has to do with snapping out of a negative situation you might be in, and happiness is a massive way of working with it. The second one has to do with not falling back in. And not falling back in means being able to redirect your energy on something else very shortly and very intensively. Take 10, 15, 20 minutes of devoting most of your energy, most of your work onto another topic that is fundamental for you. And if you do those two steps in sequence correctly, you will see how much of a difference how different your mood will be before you started with this process and after you finish the process. And of course, there are techniques and methodologies to redirect your energies for the second step, to get into flow. I'm giving you a bunch of exercises in the course, but again, we don't have time to cover this right now. Think about what would take you to invest into something that will keep every fiber of your body engaged into what you're doing. Whatever it is, do that and follow up on that. Any questions, again, please feel free to shoot. Happy always to answer and engage with you directly. Now, these were the first two blocks. The first one, recognizing your own emotions, and then, once you know what you're dealing with, influencing them according to the steps of the process that I just presented. But again, the kicker here, the more interesting part, has to do with dealing with others. And this is why we need to, once we're proficient into dealing with our own emotional state, we need to transition to expanding our skills to people we work with or the people we interact with in the office or even remotely at this point. And again, remember the engine metaphor. Before you try to influence others, before you try to work with them, be empathetic, uplift them, etc., solve conflicts or anything, you need to know and recognize precisely what you're dealing with. And this is why reading others is such a fundamental part. Now, the best thing I can suggest to you when it comes to reading others is get a body language course. Something, it doesn't need to be anything major, but learning the basics can do. In the full course, I'm giving you a full primer on key body language, movements, signals that you can recognize, posture, etc. If you want to dig deeper into it, I suggest you get a basic course with lots of picture. A book doesn't need to be so expensive, but it's something that will give you some material to think about. Now, in my experience, having gone through the work and having gone through through developing this course, I found that there are 4 major areas that serve as a good reference for whoever wants to have a framework on which to read others. Here they are. The first one, the 4 factors you need to observe in others are shape, intonation, rhythm, and coherence. The first one, shape, refers to body shape. I'm thinking posture. I'm thinking what they're leaning towards. I'm thinking open versus closed posture. And I'm thinking micro movements, micro expressions. Whatever you can see in a person's shape is a massive source of information about what that person might be thinking, what that person might be feeling, what that person is attracted to or not attracted to, whether your topic is something interesting for that person or whether you need to deviate. It's an incredibly rich source of information. And in the course, I go through 3 main areas, which are body posture, body direction, and micro expressions like self-contacts, expressions like this one, or differences between biting a lower lip or an upper lip, or micro self-contacts as well. There is a lot of detail in there, but keeping shape as a general reference is extremely valid. Second point, intonation. Intonation, I'm talking about the intonation of the person's voice. Think about the pitch. Is it a high pitch, higher than normal, lower than normal? Is it stable, unstable, indicating trembling in the voice? That can already, paired with shape, tell you a lot more. Number 3, rhythm. I'm thinking about the rhythm of breathing and the rhythm of the conversation. There is a difference between a fast, frantic breathing up here on top on your chest or lower down at on your stomach. And there is a difference when it's lower down if it's strong and deep or soft and deep. They indicate extremely different things. And it's good to know whether it's good to know where you want to it's good to know the difference. That's what I'm trying to say. And also rhythm of the conversation. If you're speaking with this person, do you have a stable rhythm going back and forth where information is flowing correctly? Or is the person presenting in a frantic way? Is the person interrupting? Does that indicate aggressiveness or does that indicate insecurity? There are different ways of telling. And 4th and very important area, coherence. Do all the other 3 factors give the same message? Or is the person trying to portray an emotion or something else that is not really what's going on in there? Because if I have a very clear, open posture, accepting, if my intonation is nice, deep, and clear, but my breathing rhythm is frantic, well, there must be something else in there that I need to watch out for. And again, this is just it's a primer of a primer. In the course, I'm going, of course, a lot deeper, giving you details, giving you examples with myself in video, and so on. But this should suffice for now. And 4th point, interacting at an emotional level. Well, this is where gold is for most leaders and managers. So Interacting at an emotional level means being able to open a whole new channel of communication. And here, I don't mean interacting at an emotional level in terms of being empathetic, providing emotional support, being positive, understanding. Of course, yes, all of this, that's part of it. But what I mean is, we all have emotions. It's a fact. And we can choose to ignore them, like I had someone say it's in the culture where that person came from at one of my workshops, or we can choose to accept them, to learn to read them, to learn to use them, and learn to communicate not just verbally, but also read the intonation of the message, of the breathing, reading the posture, and seeing whether there is something going on. And can we address that in the way we communicate and interact with that person? It's simply, if you look at it in terms of bandwidth, if you want, it's opening up a whole different channel of information that you can give, read, receive, and exchange. And of course, building a positive environment, building a psychologically safe environment, a trusting environment has massive, massive impact on the way we work together, the way the team approaches resilience, motivation, mutual support, etc., etc., etc. So what can you do as the leader to contribute or to kickstart building this type of environment? Well, first of all, go through the process. Go through the process until now and have your emotional life more figured out, if you want. Secondly, the key point here is doing something every day. It doesn't need, if you want to start working on this with your team, please don't do anything major, excessive, large, bombastic, an event or something. Don't, that's just going to backfire. What you can do instead is focus on doing something every day. And your best possible frame of reference is called emotional contagion. That's something you need to always keep in mind. Emotional contagion is a concept according to which the mood of a group always converges towards the most emotionally charged person. Say you are with a bunch of friends at a bar, having a great time, you're just happy about it, and someone enters the group in a very negative, foul, horrible mood. Whatever good mood you were in, the whole group was in, you will feel that mood converge down towards that negativity. That's emotional contagion in action. Same thing if you're just around a table, nothing, like not feeling great, but someone arrives with great news, ecstatic, joyful, energetic, you will feel that person's energy and the whole group will converge upwards towards that person. You need to be the person able to be the reference, the emotional reference point for your team. If, regardless of the situation, you manage to control your emotional state, be in a positive, constructive state, and not be influenced by negativity that is around you at work or personally, that becomes a reference. It becomes a reference for your team, and it becomes a reference for the general mood in the team. Of course, I'm not talking about being a clown, but that's the reference you need to keep in mind. How to do it? The best vehicle for emotional contagion to travel on that I have found is called high-quality connections. High-quality connections are short, brief, positive, transparent, playful even interactions that you have with your team. Now, of course, it's difficult to apply them as regularly now that we're all working remotely, but in preparation to going back to full-time work or a hybrid model, think about that. It can be something as little as you see someone running to get the elevator, you hold the door open and you smile. That's it. It doesn't take more than this. It's about showing that you care personally about what someone has developed. It means following up on a person's growing path and asking questions, giving feedback, providing help. Basically, being as useful as you can and finding out specific points where you can be constructive. Now, in the course, I'm breaking these emotional getting a bit lightheaded. During the course, I'm giving you 7 specific triggers that you can use as a reference to trigger high quality connections. For one example is awareness, just simply showing others that you are aware of them in your space. Best reference, again, in a world where we're still in the office. If you see someone, for example, that because of a meeting with a client has decided to dress up, you can pay a compliment. Of course, be appropriate, don't be creepy, you know exactly what I'm talking about, but it means that you convey to the person the fact that you see what the person has done, you consider the person's acting in your space. And since we're all right now traveling solo, we're all so much focused on our own stuff and almost building a shell around ourselves, having someone who genuinely, appropriately, again, ethically, recognizes that he or she observes us in his or her space is massive. It's something that has a tremendous effect on the rapport you have with this person. And that person will feel thankful about it. And even though it's just a little thing, if you keep on building these little things, before you know it, you will have a network of trusted supporters around you, a resilient team and a better performing team. Again, the things you need to keep into account are emotional contagion and high quality connections. Any questions before I go through a wrap up and I keep on and I start closing the webinar? Let me see if there is someone asking questions on Instagram. No, not even then. If you have anything that comes up to mind, just let me know in the comments or in the comments on Instagram, and I'll be answering the questions as good as I can. Right, we said that emotional intelligence is a skill, and leadership is leadership right now has a massive need of emotionally intelligent leaders. It's not just about soft skills and creating a nice, huggy, feely, positive environment. Emotional intelligence, when applied well, has massive, clear, tangible consequences in terms of performance, in terms of productivity, in terms of effectiveness of a team. And we've seen that building it means taking 4 steps. Number 1, self-awareness, understanding exactly what you're feeling as and why. Going into detail, journaling can help a lot about this. What's important is that you go in detail, label your emotion precisely, and try to find the trigger of that emotion. Once you have that, move on to self-regulation, influencing your own emotional life. What does this mean? It means being able to take an active role, and if you recognize there is something negative happening that is influencing the way you behave in a way you don't like, take 2 steps. First step, snap out of the negative emotion. Great way to do it is taking a pen and paper and write down something you're thankful for. That taps into happiness and taps into the 40% of happiness that is under our control. Another way of working with it is humor, depending, and be careful about how you use it, but that's a whole different story. Another second step that you need to take once this is done, immediately after, find something to focus on intensively for give or take 10 to 20 minutes, and you will see how that drives you away from the gravitational pull that that a negative emotion can bring towards you. Again, there are specific ways and methods and exercises to get into that state that I would share with you in the course. Third, reading others, understanding what they're feeling exactly and why. Same thing, before you try to fiddle around with something, you want to know what you're dealing with. And recognizing what other people are feeling is a major step in that direction. Of course, having done the work on yourself beforehand will have already helped. Because immediately, if you know how an emotion precisely looks and feels like, well, you're more able to recognize it in others. And to do this, I gave you a primer on body language. Of course, there is a more extended version in the course, in giving you a framework of reference in 4 factors. Number 1, shape. How does the person's body's shape look like? Open, closed, leaning to one side, etc. Intonation, tone of voice, pitch. Is it stable? Is it trembling? High, low? What can that indicate? Number 3, rhythm of the conversation and of the breathing. Does it indicate calm, franticness, anger? That is, there is a major difference between being frantic and being angry, and there are ways of telling. And 4th, coherence. Are these other elements coherent? Can you actually recognize whether 2 of them are conveying one message and a third one is conveying another one? It is a major difference. It's something that you should be aware of. And then, once you understand a bit more what's going on, you can move to the 4th step, which means interacting at an emotional level. Interacting at an emotional level means being able to address whatever emotion you see other people dealing with. And of course, you need to distinguish between 2 situations. Either what you do in your day-to-day, which is what I've gone through right now, or how to behave when you need to intervene more heavily, like solving a heated conflict or helping someone snap out of a negative situation that has the potential consequence of bringing the whole team's mood down. Now, of course, we don't have time to get into the whole thing, but what I would like you to take away with you is the concept of emotional contagion, which is the idea that in a group, the whole mood always converges to the most emotionally charged person. So if you manage with all your self-regulation skills, self-awareness, other awareness skills to always maintain a positive, solid, constructive emotional state, you can be the anchor for the whole team's mood. And I'm not talking again about being a clown, trying to make people laugh. That's a bad use of humor, and one of that I don't suggest you do in the course. But I'm talking about being able to maintain this positivity, genuinely doing it, and influencing others in a positive, ethical way, regardless of the conditions around you. Once you have that capability, you will see the effects that this can have on your team. Does that make sense? Do you have any questions? Well, if you have any, please write them down. Please feel free to ask. I did promise you that I would share with you a discount code for the course, and I'm sending it in the comments right now. There you go. This is the course's homepage and a code that will give you 15% off. Again, take what you've learned today, take these pieces of inspiration if you'd like to dig deeper into them, and feel free to make up your mind. Think about how you would apply them in your reality, what they mean for you, and how it would look like for you to follow this process. And feel free to test, to experiment, to see what's happening and how every single one of these points feels, and witness the consequences. Best way to start for me is to have a clear idea of what I mean. Try the happiness exercise. Take pen and paper, write something you're genuinely happy for down. And you will do it for 3 days in a row, you will see how much of an influence that has on your mood. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn, on YouTube, on Facebook, or Instagram, or even on my website. I don't think I'm particularly difficult to find. And if you want to have a deeper look and a more structured way of working in all these points, you have my courses homepage and you have a code that will give you 15% off the full price. I don't see any questions, so thank you very much for watching, for giving your time to me. I really appreciate. And again, any questions, let me know. Stay safe, and I hope to see you next time. Cheers.